So as Renata said, a little bit about me. I grew up in New Zealand. My parents owned a queen breeding apiary there. Some of my earliest childhood memories include filling queen cages with attendants for hours on end and learning how to graft from my mum. I studied biology before I moved here to Alberta, where I was an inspector for Alberta Agriculture for a little while. But now I own and run Revival Queen Bees, which used to be called Koha Apiaries, but I found no one knew how to spell Koha, so I changed that. Being in the early 80s, that's where the beekeeping in my family started. My dad decided he wanted to be a beekeeper, and back then Western Canada was where you came to be a beekeeper, so he wrote letters to every beekeeper he could find in Western Canada, and one wrote back. So he got on a plane and then on a Greyhound bus to Fort St. John, where he met my mum, who was also working at that apiary. So they moved back to New Zealand, where they started beekeeping commercially there. They did pollination and queen production. But Dad developed a propolis allergy after a couple of decades, so he had to give it up. But Mum carried on grafting for other beekeepers, and she still sells bees to other beekeepers today. The beekeeping industry in New Zealand was different in the 80s. Manuka honey wasn't such a big thing. But now, so pollination was the big money maker back then, but these days there's not a lot of Manuka where my parents are, but they make a lot of bees. So you put those bees on a truck and get some Manuka from them. So when I came to Canada and decided I wanted to do beekeeping here, I decided I should start slow, because there are some differences between New Zealand and Canada. There's some obvious ones and some less obvious ones, and I wanted to figure out, kind of feel things out and see how things go, and I'm glad I did, because I started with 4 nukes, and that year 3 of them swarmed. I did not anticipate the nectar flow here. It's very unique. It's definitely different to back home. And the obvious things, the intense winter here was very intimidating for a New Zealand boy like me. Turns out the bees do surprisingly well if you treat them right. And back home, when I was beekeeping at least, we didn't have varroa mites, so I was a little concerned about them and wanted to feel those out as well. But we bounced back from our swarming episode and we scaled up. We focused on honey to begin with to feel the industry out. We always knew in the back of our heads that queens was probably a good idea, but we wanted to feel things out. We decided that queens is kind of where we want to be. So we went that direction because we felt like we could make a difference to the industry. When I was working as an inspector, I talked to a lot of beekeepers, and I kept hearing over and over again that people weren't ecstatic about the quality of the queens that were coming in from overseas. And I was surprised at the level of importation when I first got here. But it makes sense with the climate. It's not the easiest thing to breed queens in such a short season, especially if you've got 10,000 hives. I don't think that's at all doable to make all your own queens and a large honey crop. And yeah, as I said, when I was an inspector, I talked to a lot of beekeepers, and I also noticed myself. I got some queens from a friend of mine in BC, and also at the same time I got some from California, and I found the Californian ones, I don't even think they made it through the season before I decided they were not worth my time and replaced them. I definitely noticed a lack of quality, and I also noticed a lack of local suppliers. Not to say there are none, but there weren't very many. So I'll be talking. This is kind of my process of how I do things. I'll talk about each of these in detail. So the queen mother selection, it varies a lot depending on what traits you're looking for. I'm not going to discuss it in detail because it's a huge topic and I wouldn't be able to do it justice. But if you are looking for breeding stock, I would suggest find someone reputable with a long-standing history. And if you get some breeding stock, you want to test it out to make sure that it's what you want, because what one breeder wants isn't necessarily what you're looking for. So, grafting. It's the movement of larvae from a worker cell to a queen cup. I'm sure everyone here knows that, but something I've found is that the tool you use isn't important. I use a paintbrush, but a lot of people use a Chinese tool, copper wire. My dad used to whittle down a piece of willow. Like, it doesn't need to be a fancy tool so long as it does the job. I always graft indoors, or at the very least in a vehicle. I don't graft very well with a veil on, and with bees buzzing around your head, it's kind of distracting a little bit. And I also find that the wind and the sun from being outdoors can dry things out a little faster. So if you're indoors, you've got a bit more time. So for the graft to be successful, for the tool to be good, you have to be able to move the larva without drying it out, flipping it over, stabbing it, overheating it, or chilling it. Any of those things are bad. So if you can do that, you're well on your way. And I find it's important to get comfortable, especially when you're starting out. If you're contorted into the front seat of the truck and your legs are too long, the steering wheel's in the way, it doesn't do very good. Maybe better to be in the passenger seat. Feed the parent colony, I find, helps a lot as well. If the parent colony is well fed, then the larva that you're grafting will be sitting on a lot of jelly, and they'll transfer a lot easier. Keeping the cells warm and moist is important as well, especially when you're starting out. If you're slow at grafting, by the time you finish your graft, it could be quite a while. I don't do anything special to keep them warm. I graft in a warm place, but that's about it. I'm fast enough now that I've found that it doesn't make a difference if I cover them with a cloth or anything like that. And lighting is important as well. If you can't see, you can't graft it. On that note as well, glasses as well. I don't wear glasses day to day. My wife says I should wear glasses when I'm grafting all the time. About half the time I remember to wear glasses, but it does make things easier. A lot of people just get the reading glasses from Costco, but you can get magnifying headsets with lights in them as well. I've seen people use those. I've never used them myself, but I've heard people like them. But the big thing about grafting is practice. You're not going to be good first time, second time, 10th time. So if it doesn't work out, just keep practicing, because it is tough. Once you've got it, and it's easy, but getting there is important. Now let's make sure I'm not missing anything important here. Oh yeah, I use the plastic cell cups to graft into. Friends of mine make their own, mold their own from wax. I don't find that necessary. The plastic cups work great. They're easy, they're cheap. So normally when I graft, I put them in a swarm box. It's a closed ventilated box. I shake a lot of bees in there. A lot of bees. When I think I have enough bees, I shake another couple frames in. And I feed them syrup and make sure they have a lot of pollen stores in the frames I put in, and I give them pollen patties as well. When I first started doing it, I was putting brood in there. I don't find it actually makes a difference putting brood in or not, so I don't put brood in anymore. I just a lot of young bees. Or you could use a queenless single. So that picture there is not actually a queenless single that I used. There's not enough bees in there, and it's also missing a feeder. If you use a queenless single, you've got to donate capped brood pretty regularly. and you have to be diligent to remove the rogue queen cells, because as soon as a virgin hatches, they'll stop starting cells. Let's see here. So I leave the cells in the queenless starter for 24 to 48 hours. After that time, you can tell that they're started because there's a big pool of royal jelly on the bottom, and they've started building wax around the tops of the cells. I use double deeps for my finishes. Queen right finisher, I exclude the queen to the bottom box. I pull open brood and pollen stores up to the top box, and I put cells in. Oh yeah, I should have mentioned, I graft 45 cells into a swarm box, and I put 90 cells into a finisher. So you want your finishing hives to be really strong, lots of bees again. You want to feed them, make sure they have a lot of pollen stores, and the cells are staying there until they're ready to be transferred into mating nukes. Another important thing with the finisher, I find, because they're such a strong colony with a lot of bees, they'll drink a gallon of syrup in 2 or 3 days. So come back and feed them regularly, because even when you think that they'll have syrup left, they might not. So keep them topped up. Once the cells in there are capped, it's less important to keep it topped up. But definitely while they're building out the cells, they need feed. Another thing is with the finishers, it works really well to, when I transfer the cells from the swarm box to the finisher, I shake the swarm box out in front of the finisher hive. All the young bees in the swarm box march their way into that finisher, they boost it up a little bit. So it gives it a lot of bees in there. It's very important to move the cells at the right time. If you go too early, I think on the queen wheel that we got today, it shows the sensitive development stage where you shouldn't move them. Definitely don't move them then, because you'll damage the queens, probably kill them. If it's too late, you'll get a virgin hatch and she kills everything. So you don't want that. Every now and then, it's raining, you don't want to do it, but you got to do it. For mating nukes, I use standard equipment split into three frame nukes. I make them up with a frame of brood and adhering bees and another shake of bees. I give them an empty frame of drawn comb and a frame of foundation to work on as well. I find, Curtis mentioned this as well, keeping the vegetation down around those mating nukes is quite important. It's, I think the young queens just get lost in the grass. I find I get much better success when there's no grass around the entrances. I usually get a plan for 66% return rate on my mating nukes. Well, I expect 66%, but I plan for less just because things happen. You get weeks of rain or whatever. So I leave them for 3 weeks after I place the cells before I pick. If it's going to be raining, I might pick a couple days early, but 3 weeks is good. Fine, you get a good sense of whether or not she mated well. She usually has a good laying pattern after then. So if she's good, I'll find her and put her in a cage. If she's no good, then I'll find, if I can, whatever virgin or queen is running around in there. They're usually pretty easy to find if they're no good, because they run around. They walk different to nice mated queens, and just something doesn't seem right. So I find her and kill her. And then I replace with cells right away. Some people wait a day or two, but because I'm there already, it just saves a trip just to put the cell in right away. Picking queens is easily the most time-consuming part. I envy Curtis having to just place cells and that's the end of it. It'll be really good, but you need them in a cage to sell them. So when I'm picking queens, it's quite a delicate process. So I tend not to wear gloves. I find that they get in the way. Forces me to work a little slower, which is good. Can be a bit more gentle with them. So. And later in the season, if you're using the same nukes over and over again and they've had every single round has been successful, by the time you get to July, it's full of bees. So you need to be careful about removing brood halfway through the season if you're going to keep reusing mating nukes, because otherwise it will take you 20 minutes to find a queen, and that's just far too long. The timing is everything with queen raising. You can make quality virgins a lot earlier than you can make quality mated queens. So you need lots of mature drones, and I usually wait until drones. I have a lot of drones under cat cells with purple eyes, and I usually even wait a week after that. So that means that my first queens are normally available late May, early June, depending on the season. But drones take a really long time to mature, so if you're going to be raising a lot of queens, you've got to get drone brood frames in your drone mother hives early. And as you see with the calendar, the queen raising wheel, we got the day you graft sets everything else, and so you have to be cognizant of that. If it's going to be someone's birthday, maybe shift the day, because otherwise you'll be screwed. You got to move cells when you have to move cells, and it doesn't matter what the weather is. Sometimes you have to set up a tent to get it all done, because otherwise you'll lose your batch. And that's not the end of the world. You can always make more. They're fairly easy to make, but cheap to make, but it's still a pain. So, and if you're going to be mailing queens out, that's another thing to think about as well. If you're going to be, you don't want to be putting queens in the mail on a Friday. Have them sit at the post office over the weekend. So some key points that I really want to stress is feed. If you feed the mother colony, grafting is a lot easier. You feed the starter, feed the finisher, you'll get better quality cells. And the timing. The bees don't care what's going on in your life. They don't care if it's raining. Their virgins will hatch and they'll destroy everything. And grafting requires practice. You're not going to be good at it off the bat, but keep practicing. I think you'll get it if you keep practicing. And lots of young bees in the starter and the finisher. Like, I rob capped brood from a bunch of hives for my starters and finishers. And I think that's about all I have, apart from questions.